Whoa. Hi, I'm Parker Dahl, and welcome to So What, a place where I answer the question that so many of my students want to ask. What are questions? Do we exist? Who is we? Am I me?
Doll?
Am I me? Whoa. Now that is some high-level thinking. Today, we will talk about the Enlightenment, and the first thing that we must really acknowledge is that Europe had seen a lot of development in rulers challenging, the concept of their rule by declaring that they ruled by divine right. This worked better for some countries than it did for others. This will happen in Europe that has seen an increase in the rates of literacy, a decline in the cost of printing, and a diminishment in the power of the Catholic Church. People began to question long-held beliefs that were just assumed to be true. Ancient authorities like Ptolemy and Aristotle will be heavily scrutinized for the first time in over 1,500 years.
Wow, that's a long time for a mortal.
I know. This was a system that the people, but more importantly the Catholic Church, was really comfortable with. No one questioned those authorities or the Catholic Church's use of those authorities.
It also has been a long time since everyone fell asleep to your boring lesson. See? Even you fell asleep.
You're really going to do this with the Enlightenment.
Oh, come on. It's the Enlightenment. So what? It's not like people or things got brighter. Days were still dark, right? Yeah. And it's not like philosophy will actually impact someone's life.
What? Of course philosophy impacts people's lives. Did you just ask if days were dark?
Who? Me?
Do you think days are actually the night?
What?
What are you, some kind of vampire?
That would be just so silly. A vampire. So absurd.
Well, let me enlighten you on some reasons why this time period was actually so influential. First, the scientific revolution established a precedent for doubt and discovery. Second, Enlightenment thought led to an increased emphasis on reason. And third, everyday life was shaped by environmental, medical, and economic changes. First, let's talk about how the scientific revolution established a precedent for doubt and discovery. Prior to this time period, people just accepted some truths of the universe. One of these being is that the Earth was actually the center of our universe. This was something that just made sense to people, and they just went along with it, and it also was uplifted by church doctrine. Copernicus published his works on the heavenly spheres and indicated that we were actually in a heliocentric system. This literally shifted the way that people saw the world.
that was pretty good. I still hate you.
Anyway, this was still a theory until at least Galileo Galilei proved it to be true. How could you prove something like this to be true? Through continued observation and experimentation, in a process that we now refer to as empiricism. Galileo will publish his findings, but the church had seen enough. This went too far for them, and they will work to suppress the information. They held an inquest, banned Galileo's works, forced him to recant his teachings, and placed him under house arrest. While the church was certainly heavy-handed here, it's not totally unwarranted. They were grappling with information that was revolutionary, so they doubted that this person could upend 1,500 years of accepted truth. While the church tried to stop the development of this information, they were ultimately unsuccessful, with natural philosophers like Kepler using mathematical models to provide proof for the movement of planets, and Isaac Newton would use this information to then further publish works on physics. Second, Enlightenment thought led to an increased emphasis on reason. While a scientific revolution will rely heavily on what may be observed, the Enlightenment will pair that with the concept of reasoning. René Descartes will write about this as inductive and deductive reasoning. He argues that there are just some questions that observation cannot answer. He famously demonstrated this with the questioning of his own consciousness. He solved this with a simple test. I think, therefore I am. From this simple truth, all other truth may be accessed, but not until it's accepted. There will be an explosion of individuals that will start questioning not only themselves, but the world around them. In many ways, this development in philosophy was a development of the scientific revolution, a product of cheaper printing, responses to political overreach, and just a really big societal trend.
Okay, it seems like you're going to talk about philosophy now.
This is correct. Do you have a problem with that?
Oh, no. By all means. I just want to make sure you weren't bringing in that duck.
Duck? You mean the Duke? Oh, he would be a great option for this. Greetings, young scholars. There is absolutely a lot of development in the area of philosophy during the Enlightenment. Perhaps the most impactful is that of the continued discussion of political philosophy. We last talked about the different philosophical arguments from Hobbes and Locke. While these philosophies ultimately disagreed with one another, they both agreed on a basic premise: that government should be based on a social contract that is in response to the state of nature. There will be a philosopher who will address this topic during the Enlightenment, and that is, of course, Rousseau's The Social Contract. He states that in a state of nature, people are born free, but that the corruption of society enslaves the people. This is due to the fact that government only pays attention to those who own property, which Rousseau argues is disproportionately held by those of the nobility and the clergy. Thus, government will only ever create policy to favor those groups and completely ignore the general public. I mean, it is because of this that Rousseau argues for direct democracy. A government that is controlled by the general will is the only one that will ever listen to them. Montesquieu will also be a voice in the development of political philosophy, with his publication of The Spirit of the Laws. In this, he argues that all humans and human nature is to be selfish. The way to fix this is to separate the powers into three branches, those of the legislative, judicial, and executive. Each branch will act as a check on the other because, well, each branch is selfish in the fact that it wants to have the most power and will not let another abuse its power. Not only do these philosophers show the generational discussion between different thinkers, but their philosophies will play a much larger role in the development of European society very quickly. Good day to all. His hair is always so perfect. Number 3. Everyday life was shaped by environmental, medical, and economic changes. Throughout the 17th century, disruptions in the production of food led to periodic famines, which then led to further adverse health effects, as well as death. The 18th century saw the stabilization of food production. Furthermore, the agricultural revolution will actually apply principles from that scientific revolution, which will lead to an increased efficiency in the production of food. And while that was welcome news to a lot of people, this will actually lead to a decrease in the demand for labor on those farms, and thus those farmers will be in search of work. Many of these people will go searching for work in places where there's a lot of people, cities. While disease ran almost unchecked for most of European history, the 18th century will see a diminishment in the plague, a vast reduction in the severity of smallpox, and a reduction in infant mortality. With more food being produced and less people dying of disease, the population was set for an explosion. The story of the development of early cities is realized in 2 parts. High society would engage in the trend of discussing philosophy, knowledge, and government in places like salons. Salons were typically run by women, and a place for you to meet the right people and impress them. How did you impress someone? By showing them how well versed you were in the growing popularity of different great philosophical works. Salons were not the only place where this knowledge spread. For instance, coffee houses proved to be incredibly important for that as well. While these discussions were happening for the higher classes, the consolidation of poor individuals looking for work in cities highlighted the difference between the 2 classes. These cities, even early on, struggled to address the societal needs of this new concentration of people. The vast majority of people were living in abject poverty that would only become more visceral during the Industrial Revolution. The period of the Enlightenment will have a large impact in European society with these 3 arguments. Once those ideals and changes are released into the world, they will grow in uncontrollable ways. There were many other influential figures that we did not mention, Voltaire and Diderot, just to name a few. The explosion of the use of reason will prove to be incredibly important in the development of scientific knowledge and philosophical interrogation. For, as Isaac Newton wrote, "If I see further, it's because I have stood on the shoulders of giants." A statement that would prove to be true for centuries to come. Have a great day.
There were so many different ideals being shared during this time. It feels as though this might have been a response to absolutism and a realization of those concepts shown during the Renaissance with the use of humanism. Oh, I don't know how he keeps getting me to learn this stuff, but I can tell that trouble is brewing, because I will be the one to use this information to dethrone Dahl once and for all.
You know, the whole evil laugh thing really makes you sound like a vampire.
I'm not a vampire.
Yeah. Okay, Edward.